So good morning. I'd like to call to order the Darien Board of Education Facilities Committee meeting to order. The first order of business is I would like to call for a nomination for a chair of the Facilities Committee. Deb? I will second that nomination. All in favor of that nomination for Dennis Maroney for chair of the Darien Board of Education Facilities Committee, including the quorum in the back. Thank you. Good. Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you, Duke. So we haven't, as a member of our audience pointed out, we have not had a facilities meeting in a while. So I thought we should just kind of regroup as to the KG&D master plan. It was done December of 16, and see, and as well with the Oxridge plan moving forward, if we can begin to formulate plans for the other schools and where we sit with those. So in reading the KG&D, and so if we can all just have some alignment with this, and I'm going to look more higher level than down to the granular level of which projects we should look at. For me, the big three takeaways in each school were to remove the portables, to address security, and to try to enhance vehicle circulation for drop-off and parking. So I don't know what the best way. Should we just kind of go through each school and look at them and see what we think of each school and where we are? So, please.
I'm just curious if I could ask maybe Mike. So we have this facilities plan from KG&D. And some of the things I see have been captured by your plan when you come to us for the budget, but some items are not. And I'm just curious if you're tracking, do you have a tracking of, I've put some things in, some things I don't think are necessary, and these are things that are still on the horizon.
I'm on. Well, we do track them. If you take any of the buildings, we take certain items that we feel can be accomplished through the regular capital budget program rather than being a large bonded project, which would take, several years to complete.
Right.
Of those nature, such as if you were to decide to get rid of the portables and put an addition on a building and reconfigure the front entrance or the bus drop-off to a building, you would be looking at a project that would take you over a year to start to finish and would cost, several $1 million. So we don't put that type of project generally in our capital program.
Okay.
We had the cafeteria addition in there, and then it was taken out. And it really didn't belong there. It was just kind of there to start a discussion.
So some of these bigger projects we wouldn't see in our capital budget. They are things that we should talk about here and decide among us whether we're going to bring it to the full board.
So one of the things, and this is where Mr. Lynch can potentially help us, one of the conversations was at what point in time do we update the master plan? There was a 3-year window where there was some conversation even from the prior superintendent as to you should be on a schedule where this gets updated. And then in terms of what you outlined in terms of priority, which I think makes sense, there was some logic to how we were going to follow this once we got Oxridge through the process of getting approved and getting the building committee set up. And we were going to specifically look at the 3 schools that would be impacted by the Oxridge build and ability to move ELP into Oxridge and zero in. Logically, it made sense to zero in on those 3 schools in terms of the classroom space that would be freed up,
and the portables,
removal of the portables, the classroom space that would be freed up, and what needed to be done to those 3 schools in terms of additional construction or refurbishment based on removing the portables and freeing up classroom space. So that was part of the initial kind of conversation that we talked about.
So those 3 schools, just so we all are, they're Royal, Tokenique, and Henley.
Correct.
And those schools, as a result of Oxridge being complete, those schools we would be able to remove all or most of their portables
Correct.
as a result of ELP moving out of those schools into Oxbridge.
Correct. So you take Tokenique off the conversation in that there's probably just normal maintenance and stuff we need to do to Tokenique. But I think there's very specific stuff that was in the master plan once the portables were removed from Royal
And homes.
and homes. Yep.
Right. But Holmes is not affected by the,
They don't have ELP.
They're not affected by the ELP move,
right,
but they
Right.
do
They have
have
portables.
they have portables.
2 portables
Correct.
that house the music programs.
Yeah, so those were the 3 schools. We didn't even talk about Tokenique. We
Right.
talked about
'Cause
in
ELP is
Royal,
there,
Henley,
but
and
they
Holmes.
don't have Tokenique.
We would immediately remove the portables, but we had to start work on what needed to be done at those schools if we removed the portables and additional classroom space and stuff like that.
So I'm wondering, Duke, if you could just, for my purposes, I know you guys have met a couple times, or I don't know, maybe just once or twice, for the Oxbridge Building Committee. And I'm just curious where you are in that process. You're probably very early
Sure.
on in that process.
No, we've had 2 meetings so far. We've approved to go out and update the site survey for the piece of property, so that's in process. We also reviewed and have an RFP complete to go out for the architect. That was just finished this week. We've got a timeline of dates in terms of the RFP going out, when responses are due. So that's all in process. The other thing that we're working on is the grant process. Where the grant process as it stands now, we would have to submit all the requirements around enrollment projections, funding from the town, ed specs, architectural drawings, and cost estimates by June 30th, which seems a little daunting to get all that in by June 30th. I've had several conference calls this week with Senator Duff's office. They've offered to help working with the School Building Construction Authority. I have a call today with someone at the School Building Construction Authority to help us walk through the process and see if that timeline is even feasible. And then we as a committee and as a town have to decide whether, once we understand the process and see the feasibility of what dollars we may get back, we may want to move forward without going for a
I was
grant.
gonna say.
Because if we get everything in for the June 30th deadline, great. If we don't, it delays the whole process by a year. There is a bill that's been submitted by the governor that kind of streamlines the process a little bit in terms of what has to be submitted and when, and actually pushes the date back to September 1st, I think. But that is just a bill in process right now, so we really have to stick to the June 30th. So we've got a survey going out, we've got an RFP for an architect. Anything else, Mike? We're doing a tour today of the Oxbridge School and the Tokenique School, and Mike has also organized a list of new schools and schools as old as 15 years that we'll be touring just to get a feel for what some new schools look like, how are some schools aging, and aligning them with the architects that we're looking at.
Okay,
Excellent.
great. Thank you, Duke.
And with that, do we have what's our planned date for shoveling the ground and then finish, or is that way too early to tell?
I wouldn't put any of those dates out there right now.
Fair enough.
We do have a plan, but
No, there's a lot of boxes to
moving
check
parts.
off before we
Right.
get to that point. But just curious if we had an idea. So why don't we go through and look at each school, and we can start with Henley, I think is the first school. According to this plan, there's still, I believe, 5 modular classrooms, which I was having a discussion with my wife who went to Henley School, and I don't want to out my wife and say how old she is, but those schools were there when she was in elementary school.
The
So
portables, the
portables.
portables. That's crazy.
it was a 5th grade classroom, one of them. So I don't know if it's the
that's
same
pretty subtle.
existing portable. Maybe we've updated portables, but
They have,
Well, they've renovated them, right?
they removed the portables and replaced them in the early 90s.
okay.
When they were putting the additions, the 1996 additions on. but then the portables never left after the additions were built.
So, I mean,
So
but-
those
but-
portables at Hindley and Ox Ridge are replacements of other portables that were there.
Right. So my point is just we've had portables in that school for 30, 40 years, we'll say. We'll leave it at that. So I think this is an ongoing problem that we should begin to address.
Yes.
So
Where to begin?
if we, how many, my question that I don't know the answer is, how many ELP classrooms are housed at Hindley
So
currently?
that's what I'm going to say. There's a document, I was looking for it, I can't find it.
Me
There's a
neither.
document, Mike, that shows us how many ELP classrooms at each of these schools, right?
Yeah, Hindley has none.
None?
Yeah, Hindley's moved out to Royal a couple years ago.
It's Royal Tokenique.
It's Royal,
Tokenique.
Tokenique, and Ox Ridge.
Okay. So this is not going to, so the Ox Ridge plan does not help Hindley at all then, to alleviate those portable classrooms?
Unless
No.
you're district.
No, the plan at Hindley was additional space to remove the portables.
Okay.
So that would require, this is the increase to square footage.
Right. No, I see that it has additional classrooms, but I thought I had remembered that they had one or two ELPs that would free up, so.
They used to. The ELP program used to have, when I came here, there were 4.
Right, that was the
at
original
Hindley, The
ELP.
original, yeah.
Okay, so we'd have to do some,
So this school, if you remember, this school, we redid the security.
Correct.
We moved the kindergarten classrooms and the principal and the administrative offices. And then the conversation focused around the 4 additional classrooms that were needed if eliminating the portables. And it also focused on the queuing and the potential for additional parking. This is also a school that was outlined as part of a study that could be rebuilt in the field if we ever decided to rebuild another school. We outlined which schools could be rebuilt while a school was in process. There was a lot of conversation, Mike, right, around the redo of the library here and the movement of the library.
Right, there was some sketches showing the library being moved to the rear of the building and reopening up the old front entrance
Right.
area. And they talked about putting some additional classrooms there if you were to make that library addition a 2-story addition. And then the other
They were going to put it back.
plan, I
here,
think,
right?
showed classrooms going off the 1996 edition, off the back of that.
with that, I think there's something that's always bothered me with this is that just my personal viewpoint of this is that there seems to be waves of spending money to do alterations to our schools. So the schools seem to be built in the 50s and early 60s, and then in 96 we got another wave of money where we did all these renovations, and now, you know, Mr. McLaughlin the other night was talking that we should bring projects forward. So to me, I'm very leery of doing these waves every 20 years because then it just puts an onus on the next generation. So for me, I would much more have a plan to do certain schools here and there and kind of begin to space this out over time as opposed to having just a dump of construction every couple of years, every generation, we'll say.
I'm more of a fan of something like looking at doing something every 5 years, like maybe a more substantial project every 5 years, so you're being more fiscally responsible about how you're rolling these out. But I would love to see a more long-term plan. We have a lot of buildings that have a lot of issues that need to be addressed, and with Hindley, the debate will be, should we just do the renovation, or does it make sense, because it's a building that could potentially be rebuilt while the current building is there, you know, still being used. So I think that's what we kind of need to start to think about. How do we want to plan this out? Because we have several buildings, and as time goes along, these buildings will just require more work, and we don't want to be in a situation like Ox Ridge where it's either spend $5 million or tear the building down and rebuild it. We want to be more mindful of what our needs are in our facilities.
Yeah, I agree. So I think it's an important part that we need to be in alignment with that of how we're going to move forward. So let's make
So since this is almost 2.5 years old, should we also be talking, and maybe Mike can give us his opinion, should we be talking about timing on a new study?
Yep.
So that we can incorporate what we've done and incorporate the plan for Oxbridge and then see where we turn out as a result of that.
I don't think you have to do that for another 2 years or so. You know, I think revisiting a capital improvement plan every 5 years is prudent. You know, I think if you went now, you would just be rechurning what
we
you
already
already
have.
So not much would change from
No,
this.
no. You know,
Okay. So for Henley, it's I don't know, unless we have other options. It looks like we just have to do the only option is to do construction for Henley because it's 5 classrooms that
To eliminate the portables.
Correct.
To eliminate the portables, you would have to do an expansion and renovation to get
So-
those 4 classrooms. So that's,
Here's a question. What
Yeah.
of the properties in Arundel Heights, are they, any of them zoned for Henley?
I believe they're Royal.
All of
Pa-
them?
Palmer's would be Henley.
That's what I thought. So I think part
Yeah.
of this discussion has to be that is whatever we've said.
Right.
It's not just removing portables, it's
Right.
looking at the potential influx of students to that school.
Why
I think
would-
to the point,
Is the renovation, if we renovate,
Why would Palmer's be Royal? Because there are people that
no, I
live-
meant Palmer's. I'm sorry, I'm looking at Henley. Palmer's would be Henley. Holmes.
Holmes.
Homes.
Yeah.
Even though the people that live on West Avenue, they all go to Royal right there.
I think this is the question of where
Oh.
that area is very.
It's all Royal
Screwy.
because there are people that live by the
There are people
donut shop and
there are
they go
people
to
who
Royal.
live on Patton Drive who go to Holmes.
Yeah, I think Heights Road, there are people that live
There's
there.
schools, 3 schools, right? And
Yeah.
that corner is actually 4 schools because Avalon is Tokenique.
Right.
Right.
So and across the bridge is Henley, and then you have
Yeah.
Royal and Holmes. So there's 4
I think
schools.
it's gonna come down to when we have a new superintendent and then these projects are built, I think there's probably gonna be a conversation about what schools those developments are districted for. When
Right.
Avalon was originally not
Home.
Tokenique.
Right.
Moved to Tokenique because there was space, so I think in these conversations, we have to be mindful of the schools that could house some of these, you know.
And that,
Right.
obviously, those numbers are very unpredictable at this point in time. We have some sense, but really no idea of a firm number of children that are going to be coming into the schools based
Exactly.
on those 3 projects that we have in town.
And like Corbin Drive, is that Henley?
That's
Henley
Royal.
or Corbin Drive?
Corbin Drive is Royal. Right now, it's districted for Royal. Someone had thought, I think Dr. Brenner thought it was Tokenique, but then we took a closer look at it, and I'm pretty
Then you
sure
go
it's
back to the King's Highway and it's Tokenique.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that one was another one that was, no one was originally.
They're just, anyway, so,
Yeah,
yes,
so I
that's-
mean, I think that's a great point, Katie, is that we're still unsure as to what those developments are going to bring us and what we have to do.
And I think that our plan now, like what we should be doing, I mean, you're
Yeah,
the chair,
no,
so,
go
but it's very fluid, so this isn't a firm plan, this is a tentative look at where things are going, and as we have more information about these new developments, some of them are going to be started over this year, so we'll have a better idea, maybe in a year, of where the enrollment's going to come out on those projects.
But I think if you go back to the original goals, so build Oxbridge, remove the portables.
Yep.
And I think that's kind of the direction we should still go
Yes.
down while incorporating
Absolutely.
an enrollment study and the effect of those developments and the potential to have to realign certain neighborhoods with schools.
Right. I agree.
Because one of the conversations should be, you know, our focus has always been community neighborhood schools. So you'd have to incorporate into that conversation, does Avalon eventually go back to the school that really serves that neighborhood there versus them going across town to Tokenique?
Right. All conversations to be had. Can't.
Yeah. Okay, so the next goal was Ox Ridge, which we know is complete or in the process.
New building.
Correct. So we can take that one off the table, check. Royal School.
So this is where we have the portables and ELP.
Correct. So we have three modular classrooms at Royal, which my understanding would all be taken over by Oxbridge. So,
Well, as the ELP classrooms move out of Royal, those portables ostensibly, those classrooms can be moved into the building because
Correct.
we'll be gaining classroom space within Royal.
but the only thing about Royal that I think we'd have to discuss as well is those classrooms are very small. Some of those classrooms are
They're
really
tiny.
small, and they're not even anywhere close to the current specifications of what a classroom should be.
Right. And the other issue is that the first grade wing is similar in construction to the old Tokenique or the existing Ox Ridge as far as minimal insulation and heating. The one good thing is they're very large classrooms.
They are a nice size classroom, but they're freezing.
Yeah, and we've done, we've doubled the amount of radiation in all the rooms and the hallways, and we've redone the lighting, and, we've done everything we can to kind of boost them up, but that's it. It's just not a very good, it's not a very well-built addition. They were going for, volume of square footage
As opposed to
back in that
quality.
time. And that was across the country. That's not a Darien problem.
That was just a generational thing.
Yeah.
But, so in your mind, I mean, clearly that particular wing has many issues. And then I think in Royal, they're also faced with very small fifth grade classrooms that,
Yes.
they're jamming these big kids into a much too small room. So there are a couple of issues facing that building. But I guess I'm wondering, in your opinion, Mike, with the first grade wing, what's the useful life of that going forward? Do you have any thoughts? Like, is that something we
It's
can?
structurally in good condition. It's got fairly new windows in it. I mean, it's got a good long life left in it, but it's what it is. It's not.
There's
Yeah.
always going to be some issues with that
Correct.
wing. So then you have to
I
weigh,
would think
guess.
that if there was going to be an addition or a renovation done, you'd want to capture the undersized classrooms
Right.
in the 1947-48 building and the inadequate first grade classrooms. And so, you would not be building.
I think that we
just-
talked about that years ago too.
We did. We did,
tearing
yes.
that wing down and.
I think the idea of that you would just build 3 spaces because you're removing 3 spaces, I think you could do things differently. That you could probably take 2 small classrooms upstairs, make 1, so then you need another classroom, things
Right.
like that.
Right.
But I would think the addition would probably be closer to, 6 or 7 classrooms. I mean, like as an example, the art room. The art room is right now it's a converted what was a science room.
Yeah.
And the kiln is downstairs.
Right.
When it was downstairs, it was 1.5 classrooms, and then
ELP.
a
took
faculty
over.
storage room, and then the kiln room behind. So you have to go out in the hallway and around. So there's some inadequacies in that building that have to be addressed.
I mean, for me, what I'd like personally to try to do is if we can try to prioritize which schools are in most need of, and try to lay out 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe. I don't know if that's feasible.
Well, you could also lay out, a lot of times when there's construction like this in multiple spaces, you would, just as an example, you would do Ox Ridge, and then you would do Holmes and Hindley, because nothing at Ox Ridge is going to affect them one way or the other.
Right.
Right.
And then the other buildings, when ELP leaves them, they've now got a little swing space, so you can more easily do an addition on them. So then you would say the next phase would be Royal Middlesex, and any enhancement that had to be done to Tokenique, which I can't believe there is.
Right. So it's exactly my thoughts, is that Hindley and Holmes should be a higher priority since they're not affected by the Ox Ridge building.
And you can build them with minimal impact on the day-to-day
School.
program.
Right.
Yeah.
So, well, we'll get to Middlesex, I think, but I think that's the other question for me is how much is enrollment going to affect Middlesex, and does that push that up quicker than we think?
It's the other Mike that's the enrollment guy.
Right.
The bubble's gone through.
The bubble's gone through, exactly. So hopefully we're okay with that, but
I mean, the thing you have to
Depending
keep
on
in
the
mind
projects.
there is that school is at something like 95 or 98% capacity.
Capacity right now,
And-
yes.
And it was always recommended that a school should be at about 80.
80 to 85, yeah.
80 to 85% capacity.
And that school does have the infrastructure in place. When that building was built, they stubbed out electric, heating lines, water, sewer, and planned where an addition would go. So that's all, a lot of that work is pre-built. So you would really have a minimal impact on the school operations to put an addition on there.
The person that headed that up is on the Oxridge Building Committee, and he spoke to that because that's the goal of the new Oxridge is to look at if, you know, at some point in time we needed to expand it, that it's built with flexible space or
Right.
built that an addition could be put on it very easily.
very
it's a great
smart.
idea. I think forward thinking is always a plus for
Yeah.
that.
Very smart.
Okay, so Royal, I think that could be a difficult one. Tokenique, I think we're pretty clear that will be fairly minimal work done with the ELP moving. There's 3 currently there, which should allow much more space at Tokenique. Did I miss Holmes?
No, wasn't it? Oh, wait, maybe you did.
Because I go to Middlesex, Darien, yeah, so I missed Holmes. So if we
Yes.
go back to Holmes,
Okay, after Henley. Yeah, it's after Henley.
Holmes
So-
currently has the 2 portables,
No ELP,
no ELP,
so they will not benefit at all from Oxridge.
correct.
So if you
And-
remember with Holmes, there was a big conversation and the town went ahead and bought the property and the house
Right.
and tore the house down. So any conversation around that, we should include that piece of property, you know, that initially was spec'd out for more parking.
Right. Mr. Lynch, does Holmes have the same type of vestibule that all the other schools now currently have for
Man-trap?
man-trap?
It's the same as Middlesex.
Oh, okay.
It's the modular man trap,
Have you seen that?
a complete unit,
really
walls,
good.
windows. They were installed this summer.
So you go in on the entrance off of Hoyt Street? Or
You go in
one
on the
by
entrance next, between the common room and the original building.
Okay,
What was the handicap entrance? That's where it is.
okay,
Before that, they were up in the old little hallway
By
that
the
came in the
cafeteria?
front door, the original front door of the building.
right. Okay. So we don't have the security issue there anymore, so it's just now
That's correct.
to remove the portable?
Yes,
Okay. And as well as parking?
yes.
Okay.
And in this plan, they do show parking, I guess, where that
Where the
acquired
property
property was, moving some parking, additional parking. I guess, do they have parking issues over there?
My
Are there parking
kids went
issues
there.
over there?
It's tight. You know, during the average school day, there were probably about 5 or 6 spaces, and then a lot of parents park along the curb by the common room, where they would park to queue up, you know, to pick up the children at the end of the day.
The bus loop. Is that
And the bus loop
The
is
bus loop's
separate.
different.
Oh, okay.
So the bus, you know, the
Yeah,
bus
it's
loop is
outside.
separate. The issue is, Hoyt is a very highly traveled road.
Yeah. You
And,
can't queue up on Hoyt.
No.
No.
Well,
Gotta queue.
But
there is a
generally,
queue, there is a queue up on Hoyt, and if you have to leave anywhere between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, right?
yeah,
Oh.
yeah, waiting.
Yeah, the neighbors have to expect.
And there's a number of kids that walk. There's a gravel path behind the school that goes down
Right.
And there's a number of kids that go down that road, so they're not even getting picked up. The parents are at the bottom of the hill.
Right.
Oh, they just, right, and the parents wait for them down there.
Yes.
I don't like that. It doesn't sound like a good
Well, that's
spot.
walkable.
I think that's been there about 40 years. A bunch of parents built that.
Well, they built the gravel path so the kids could walk.
They made a gravel path. Two guys gave pieces of their property, and they built a gravel path that goes from down up
How
right to the
interesting.
back of the field.
Yeah, and there's steps going down to Lake Drive on the other side of,
Yeah, there's steps on the corner by the parking lot for Lake.
so.
They figured it out, okay.
But I think that's an interesting point. You know, but Holmes is not the only school that has a major road in front of it. I mean,
No,
Hindley's on a
Royal
post
does.
road, Royal's on Mansfield, Tokenique's on 136. I mean, every elementary school is on a major
Yeah,
road.
I think the difference with Holmes is that it doesn't have a long driveway
Right.
or a small street or anything like that.
Right,
It's
just
the
cute
road is
out
right
the
there.
road, yeah.
So, okay, so Holmes, is like Hindley, where we have to do some renovation, although maybe a little smaller because it's only 2 classrooms. And then we go to Middlesex. Where's my Middlesex? Middlesex. So here is more of just to bring some more classrooms, as Duke said, we're pretty full, and some vehicle circulation improvement, which would be much needed for me as a commuter trying to get through Middlesex to get to Norotan Heights is miserable at 7:10 a.m. And especially if there's a concert where people are dropping their kids off for that area
Like an early
becomes
practice or something?
the entire town of Darien is driving at 7 o'clock to get to Middlesex. So
I know.
that's a very difficult area to get through. So I think for Middlesex,
So they're proposing another entry. Is that what I see on here?
well, they're talking about adding some additional classrooms off the back,
Right.
and as well as having a traffic study, right?
I think that's very smart to do a traffic study.
But with
This
that,
is something
I
we
wonder.
can do now, like if it's just creating another entrance to Middlesex, is that something we can do without worrying about bonding? We could do that as part of a capital project. If that's something, maybe a traffic study first to see if that help alleviate those traffic concerns there.
Well, I think the question I have and I totally agree, but my question is, and maybe this is to Mr. Lynch, is with the Palmers and Federal additions going just down the street, my recollection is they're redoing those lights and redoing the intersection at Norotan Heights, which is not quite that area, but it's still close.
Yeah.
So what impact are those traffic changes going to do on Middlesex? Do we know, or
We don't.
we don't
We
know?
need a study, I guess.
But should we dovetail it all in? Maybe that's something
Probably.
we can talk to the town with, of how do we do a study together, or see what the impact of the work there is going to do to Middlesex.
Well, I wonder,
There's
did they
been
have a
traffic
traffic
studies
study?
done for both those
Yeah, there were traffic studies. so we
projects
can
already,
dovetail on
because
those.
they're all basically approved, those projects.
Oh, done?
Yes.
But I thought that I thought Jamie was talking about doing something else, or there was a meeting a couple weeks ago where a gentleman was talking about changing Norotan Heights, and with that,
That's up at
That's West
the
and-
2 gas stations.
Yeah, that's at
Okay.
West and
And
Height and.
that's all being redone in conjunction
Road.
with the
but
state.
we're not changing the intersection at the other end of Norotan Heights.
I don't know what's in the plans pertaining to federal.
They were
commerce.
waiting on the state for because I think they're making it 2 lanes, so that the corner of West and Norotan Avenue.
Right.
Where they're gonna add
Turning
a
lanes.
turn lane, and so it'll help to free up the congestion there, which was not quite Middlesex Middle School, but in that.
But then you go to that,
Yeah, I don't know.
where's that, Hollow Tree and West? Is
Right,
that-
I
that
don't-
intersection
Yeah.
affected as well? or
Well,
no?
there's 2 intersections there, right? One right by the train station and one closer to the
Edgerton,
school.
and
Right.
then,
We'd have to maybe go to Jeremy and see
Yes, you would.
if there's any changes incorporated in those 2 developments.
Okay.
and they
Yeah,
probably
that's
have
my
traffic studies related to those projects that maybe we can piggyback on and just incorporate that into whatever traffic study we need for Middlesex. because all that will impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
The
To
middle
me, that's
schools.
going to be a major
Oh, yeah.
discussion.
Especially even during the construction period where there's just going to be a lot of activity down there, and how does that impact what you know, the 7 to 7:30 crunch time of everybody trying to get their kid to Middlesex, and you and everybody trying to get to New York City. So that
I think it would be important that when they do the traffic studies, that they're not off hours to when we're coming and going from school,
Right.
or you're not going to get an accurate reading.
So we should
Yeah,
make sure
during
they're
the peak
peak times,
hours.
so like peak
Sure. You know,
would
like
be-
if they say, well, yeah, we were out there from, 9 to 2:30.
Nobody's driving.
That sounds
Only
good, but you want them there.
Be there 7 to.
They need to be there
Absolutely.
7 to 8, and then probably 2 to 3 to see what the real traffic looks like.
Okay, so I think we're clear with that, and then the addition off the back if we need to
Well,
do
the
that.
addition right now, I mean, it sounds we are pretty much at capacity, but I know the incoming, and I know you don't know about the enrollment, but I think the incoming 6th grade class is pretty big, but then after that, it seems to
Level off.
Yeah,
come down a little bit.
so hopefully we can work through that one, and that can be a lower priority.
Right.
And then Darien High School, I think we're pretty clear that with the completion of the
Cafeteria.
cafeteria, that we should be fairly set with that school for the time being. Yep.
I don't know if that's
For me, the
facilities. I think
security
it's
booths,
more of a-
I'm not sure that's our level since we're discussing it as a board, but
I think that's got to come from the administration.
yeah, for me. But good point, I think, to have a discussion on that.
Yeah, we're not really like the capital projects. We're more like actual
I think it's got to be
buildings.
part of the broader
Yeah.
security conversation.
Which I thought they were coming back to the full
They
board
are.
with something, so I think that's not in our purview. We're facilities, so I mean it is capital too. It's just facilities. We will wait for the full board.
So if we sum this up, we have 4 schools that we need to look at, I think. Hinley, Royal, Holmes, Middlesex. If we take the others off the table that are good or not, or already in process.
Not as pressing. So, but prioritizing Holmes and Hinley.
For me, they're 1 and 1A. I don't know which one's which, but for me, that would be the 2.
But if it's a large enough project that could be bonded, then they could potentially happen
Go together?
go together. And once we determine the full impact of Oxridge, but again, those buildings aren't really benefiting from Oxridge,
Oxridge, right.
so
So they could happen in parallel as
we
well.
could start moving ahead on those
Right.
now.
So I think the one thing that we have to think about is, and this is I think some lessons learned from the Oxridge process, is we're somewhat in transition with Dr. Landon and going through the new superintendent process, but we really need from the administration kind of their goals and objectives with these schools.
Right.
So, I think it's great what we're doing in terms of what we feel we're prioritizing, but that's really for the administration to prioritize and come to us and say, this is what we need to do for these particular schools, and this is why.
But I do
So-
think our committee should be able to set the tone, so we can pass along to administration, here are our thoughts, and now can you please opine on what we think?
Absolutely. I mean, we're here to move it along and support them and go through the process, but I think what we saw through the Oxridge process is we were going down a path, and we really needed the administration to go down
It should
a
be hand in hand,
path
right.
sooner. So, but I think if you sat down with the administration over and above Mr. Lynch, they'd probably be in agreement with the direction that we're going down. But I think that's kind of an important key in the next kind of meeting or conversation that we have with them. Make sure we're aligned with what the administration has assessed are the needs from an educational standpoint.
Yeah, Katie?
One other point I think we should be mindful of, until the building committee has put forward a plan that has been approved, which includes ELP, I think we need to be careful that we don't jump to the conclusion that ELP will for sure be housed at Oxford. We as a board put it forward, it's in the ed specs, but as we know at the high school, until things were value engineered out, things change. I'm not
People are gonna panic.
Come out, they say what we want.
Well, it's
for
fluid.
is too big, and it can't be there, and it needs to be somewhere else. I'm not saying that, but I think, I don't want to set off alarm bells, but I do think we need to be mindful of removing portables with the assumption that ELP will for sure be at Oxford and built with Oxford.
Well, and
Until that building committee
and-
has.
No, and I think that's a fair point, but then, you know, I
Henley and
think
Holmes
we
will
have
be
to
impacted.
make some type of assumption that this is going to move forward. Otherwise, we can't plan. So we have to make that assumption, and if it changes, then we have to adjust the plan. But
So to
and to
Katie-
Deb's point, I think Henley and Holmes are
We
not
don't have
affected by
LP,
that.
so they don't, we can start the process of looking into those two buildings because they won't benefit from the Oxford renovation. I think, in my mind, I want to keep the process moving, and we can tie in administration so that, you know, Dr. Landon can start the process, and then the new superintendent can continue and hit the ground running with this, because I think it's important that we not lose momentum. These are buildings that need to have facilities issues addressed. So the two buildings that we're targeting as 1 and 1A will not be impacted by Oxbridge. So yeah, I do agree that with Royal, sort of keep it in mind that it's out there, but it's not going to be our top priority right now.
So to Katie's point, which is a good point, and the conversations have been great, and I think having John Zagrodzky, you know, on the committee, he is all for building what we need on that particular property, incorporating ELP, but we had a long conversation, and Mr. Lynch and Mr. Feeney were there about enrollment projections for ELP, and Mr. Zagrodzky is insistent on making sure we're building for the future. So one of the goals in the site survey is to actually see the maximum size building we can build on that property. So all those things are being incorporated, because to Katie's point, you know, there's a conversation, oh, the enrollment was never right, you know, and that's why we're out of space. The enrollment has been almost spot on. It's the schools have been value engineered and not built correctly.
Right.
So, you know, and that's the point we got across the last time. So Katie's point is spot on, but right now the process is moving towards ELP there, but once we understand the size of the site and the maximum size building we can build, or exactly the size of the building we can build with the potential for easy additions, is also part of the scope in the conversation, which I think is a good thing.
Well, and I think as we've seen at the board, ELP is growing and it's not predictable. So, and if a child comes to us with special needs, they go into the program. So we have to be mindful of the fact that this program can continue to grow. So I think it's wise to make sure that that ELP space, wherever it is, hopefully at Oxbridge, that it is a flexible space that can grow with the potential increase
Exactly.
to enrollment.
Good.
But I do think, to Duke's point, I think for me, you know, because we're putting forth Henley and Holmes maybe as our top priorities, but I think your point is maybe Royal rises to that level with the inadequate size of the classrooms, and maybe the new superintendent will say this is inadequate for teaching, and maybe this should be the higher priority. But I think that's a fair point. So do we have anything more do you think we should be discussing, or are we late? Because we also have to leave this room by 9 o'clock because there's a meeting at 9:15.
Right. Well, I guess where do we go from here? So
Next steps? Yeah.
next step.
That I don't know.
Well, I think, I mean, all right, so I'm going to tell you what I think then. What I think the next step is a common.
Jamie said spend the money, so.
I heard that, so I'm ready to go. But, so I think the next step is just to circle in Dr. Landon and see where administration comes out on this, and you know, have another meeting soon, and so we keep the momentum going.
Right.
But tie in administration, and be mindful that these are just tentative plans. These aren't firm plans. We'd have to go to the board but we're just trying to flesh everything out at the committee level before we get to that point. But I think it's important to have administration now opine on this particular discussion.
Fair.
Any public comment?
Yeah. Public comment? That's it, thank you. Okay, motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor? Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.